Thank you for joining us today as we close out Women's History Month with our panel of partners who are working to embrace equity in their sustainability programs. As you all may be aware, the United Nations for International Women's Day selected the theme of Embrace Equity, and we did quite a bit of social media outreach with our partners to highlight what it means to them to embrace equity. So today you have a chance to hear more directly from 4 of our key partners and also folks on the Equal Origins team. Again, we're closing out Women's History Month, and gender equity, as we all know, is a global development priority and a growing business priority. We're now well into the decade of action as declared by the United Nations to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. To support efforts to achieve SDG 5, companies and countries are redoubling their efforts to advance gender equity. And this session is going to underscore that. This is also evidenced by the number of countries that actually have published feminist foreign policies and legislation from some of the largest international donor agency governments. I think many of you are aware the number of development organizations represented here, starting with Sweden in 2014, Canada and France, Mexico, Spain, Luxembourg, Germany just announced their policy last year, Chile, Colombia as well, and Liberia. You may have heard that last week USAID published its updated gender policy for also focused on development assistance, and countries like France have committed to reach 50% of gender-focused aid at present. So this represents a significant opportunity for us as actors in the coffee and cocoa sectors to align our efforts and to seek public support, as well as invest our own resources to build our own capacity as the coffee and cocoa sectors to advance gender equity in a way that can be sustainable over the long run and also drive the kind of transformative change that is so needed to ensure farming women and their families can thrive. We see our role as Equal Origins to help bring together some of the good agricultural practice, development practice in gender, and help translate it to a degree with partnerships so that the private sector in particular can take action in a meaningful way. We will we're not only working in coffee and cocoa, but there are opportunities to advance also in other agricultural sectors. So just quickly, this is our first webinar of our 2023 series. We're taking the theme of Embrace Equity, as I mentioned, to hear from 4 leading organizations that are investing in gender equity. Our conversation is focusing on these 3 points. We want to have it be a very interactive session, so I will also invite my colleague Greg Minahan to help co-facilitate some of the conversation. And we really want this to be interactive and also to be able to hear from you. So feel free to write your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function as we move forward, and we will have time at the end for your questions. So now I'm thrilled to welcome our panelists. We are very grateful for their commitment to this issue and for joining us today. So we'll start left to right across and would invite Pablo to introduce himself, then Kelly, then Michael, and then Kate. So welcome and thank you all for being here.
Buenos días a todos y a todas. Muchas gracias a Equal Origins, a Kimberly, a Greg por invitarnos y por poder compartir básicamente nuestras lecciones aprendidas abordando la equidad de género. Soy Pablo Ruiz, soy el director ejecutivo de la Fundación Neumann para la oficina en Centroamérica y es un gusto poder compartir en este mes especial con ustedes.
Thank you, Pablo. Kelly?
Good morning. Hello, this is Kelly Amoroso. I'm with Allegro Coffee and Tea. We have been working with Equal Origins for many years now and working with farmers in our supply chain to improve the advancement of gender equity.
Thanks, Kelly. Welcome. Michael?
Hola, hola, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad. Mi nombre es Michael Montalbán, gerente general de la cooperativa La Prosperidad de Chirinos. Somos una organización de 55 años. Estamos ubicados en Perú, en la zona norte. Trabajamos con más de 800 familias productoras de café. Y agradecidos por la invitación de Equal Origins y también trabajando sobre el tema de equidad de género dentro de nuestra organización.
Thank you, Michelle. And Kate.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Kate Cavalin. I'm the general manager of Cacao Latitudes. We are a specialty cocoa importer and distributor and a company that is part of the umbrella of Ecom Agroindustrial. So we have had the pleasure of working with Equal Origins in Peru directly with Michael and some of the other associations that were part of the project that happened last year. And then also part of the greater initiative that Ecom is running with the gender. Excited to talk about. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kate. Great. And then just to highlight briefly our team, I'm Kimberly Eason. I am the founder and the CEO of Equal Origins. My colleague Greg Minahan has been with us for 3 years now and is our co-designer of the Gender Equity Index. And we've invited Bemlak Malesi from Ethiopia joining us this morning. She's played a key role in our Better Together workshop program with funded by GIZ and with Ecom and Fahem Plantation in Ethiopia. So we're eager to hear also about her experience with that. Great. Well, the first part of this conversation is about getting on the same page. Where are we with regards to the scope and impact of the gender gap in coffee and cocoa production, especially regarding its impact on sustainability goals? We know from data from the ICO and others that women in coffee and cocoa production are responsible for a significant portion of the labor on farms and along the supply chain. What we also know through research is that women are only about 20% of participants in vocational education. And so what this results in is a continued inequality in terms of access to critical resources that women need to be successful as farmers, and not only have success in their productive capacity, but then that also has a series of other impacts in terms of their agency and their decision-making, opportunities for decision-making and economic empowerment. I just participated in a webinar earlier this morning from USAID where, again, it was made clear that data indicates that when women are empowered, they're more likely to adapt climate-smart solutions and contribute to better environmental outcomes, better education outcomes, and overall a higher degree of satisfaction in life. So there are many reasons to promote and advance gender equity, and I would like to invite our panelists to also share their point of view. So Pablo, then Michael, if you would please share your view.
Okay. ¿Me escuchan ahora mejor? Sí, claro, como fundación yo creo que pues ha sido bastante relevante, ¿verdad? El poder tener una mejor visión sobre el abordaje de género. Realmente lo hemos iniciado a trabajar por allá por el 2014 y normalmente no lo hacíamos, ¿no? Normalmente no teníamos una visión de poder atender y poder entender realmente los retos que enfrentan las mujeres. Eso nos ha llevado a una serie de lecciones, ¿verdad? De poder entender sus necesidades, de poder entender ciertas brechas que se encuentran y limitantes, ¿verdad? Y también a poder reconocer que realmente uno tiene que construir una mejor capacidad dentro de su equipo para poder abordar el tema de género, ¿verdad? Definitivamente creo que una de las ventajas como fundación es que estamos incorporando una visión de género dentro de nuestra teoría de cambio, en donde abordamos negocios familiares, en donde abordamos desarrollo organizativo, el tema de cambio climático y el tema de juventud. Y eso es una ventaja, pero a la vez tenemos que seguir construyendo en tener una mejor estructura dentro de la organización, políticas más claras para abordar el tema de género y bueno, poder realmente darle mejores herramientas tanto a nuestros colaboradores como a los beneficiarios de los proyectos, ¿verdad? Para que podamos incorporar ese abordaje de género y que podamos avanzar como cadena de café, especialmente con las mujeres, que ha sido un grupo, ¿verdad?, que no hemos abordado lo suficiente, que no hemos reconocido el valor y que no hemos apreciado todo lo que han contribuido en desarrollar la caficultura.
Thank you, Paulo. Michael, adelante.
Muchas gracias, Kimberly. Nosotros como cooperativa, como organización, estamos teniendo un trabajo también de enfoque en fortalecimiento del tema de género, viendo la importancia que cumple el rol de la mujer dentro de la organización y dentro también del sistema productivo de café. Hoy en día estamos teniendo ya un 20% de nuestra membresía con socias mujeres y también tenemos un comité que hace trabajo diferenciado con ellas, que es el Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera, que busca empoderar a nuestras socias de la organización. Como iniciativas de nuestra cooperativa también estamos viendo la posibilidad y la oportunidad de que ellas asuman roles directivos dentro de la organización. Eso lo hemos establecido a través de nuestros estatutos, como políticas también internas de la organización, pero vemos que necesitamos aún fortalecer más sus capacidades de ellas a nivel en el tema de liderazgo, el tema también del hogar, porque para que una socia mujer asuma el tema de liderazgo de la parte directriz de la organización necesita el apoyo de su núcleo familiar del hogar. Entonces eso lo estamos haciendo a nivel de asistencia técnica, a nivel de proyectos pilotos con nuestras socias mujeres dentro de la organización, pero vemos que es una parte fundamental para la sostenibilidad. Las socias mujeres juegan un rol muy importante dentro de la cooperativa y que tengan las mismas oportunidades y también los mismos derechos dentro de ella, ¿no? Hoy en día participan de manera activa. Hemos hecho también el tema de seguridad alimentaria, de diversificación productiva, crianza de animales menores y también capacitándolas en el tema de liderazgo, pero notamos aún que hay un cierto temor dentro de ellas de querer asumir roles directivos. Entonces, por eso es que agradecemos a Equal, Alegro también por habernos apoyado en identificar esta brecha y poder trabajar sobre ello, ¿no? Entonces, como organización no tenemos claro en nuestros horizontes que el tema de equidad de género es parte fundamental para la sostenibilidad.
Thank you, Michael. Bemlak, I'm not sure if you're able to turn on your video, but given where you are in Ethiopia and the work that you've been doing, would you like to share something about the importance of women's participation in the agricultural supply chain?
Thank you all for being here. The thing that we had a chance to see with the Better Together workshop and the GEI in general is to see that a lot of the organizations had a misconception that the problems lied outside in the external environment and they weren't able to tackle with gender norms and include gender within their sustainability development plans. And so a thing that was an eye-opening experience for them was to consider their own internal organization and to assess what the problems are in order to start from a controlled environment where they can easily influence their HR structures and their internal structures to include women in order for that initiation to come from inside and then go outside to external environments. And another thing was that there should be a very strict consideration of the gender equity development plan and budgeting, because those are key things that they should consider, because a lot of the organizations were stuck with reaching women, but not being able to go further into empowering and benefiting and transforming gender norms. And so creating a gender equity development plan and budgeting allows to create accountability And so that was also a huge insight that organizations were able to have with the GEI and the Better Together workshop. And another interesting thing was that we had a different pool of organizations such as NGOs, producer organizations, importers. And so having to participate with the Better Together workshop and the Gender Equity Index in general helped to create a pool of people that had the same interest and the same values, and where those values were able to intersect. And so it created a pool of synergy where people and organizations can now consider working together to push the goal of gender equity forward. And so just in general with sustainability and including gender, it was very important to see that if the sustainability development goals didn't have gender as a fundamental component, that they were failing to be efficient and very effective in addressing challenge, especially with the current trajectory of coffee, with deforestation, climate change, and so on and so forth. So it was a very eye-opening moment, and we learned a lot from it.
Thank you, Bemlak, for reflecting the experience of the recent, the workshop series, the Better Together workshop series. Fantastic. So we'll move in a bit more to a conversation where we are talking about current initiatives and the work of Equal Origins. Before doing that, and I'll have Greg lead that part of the conversation, I'd like to invite Kelly and Kate to reflect a bit on the importance of women's role in helping to ensure that we can reach our sustainability objectives as the private sector. So Kelly, and then Kate.
Hello. I apologize. My camera's not working this morning. So yes, absolutely. I think that it is really important for the coffee sector to gather together and really advance the initiatives for gender equity. We understand, and hearing from Michael, one of our partners in Peru, this is really important for us to have sustainability within the supply chain. It's something that we need to support as an industry and come together and look and see how we can respond to their requests and needs for improving the awareness around gender equity in coffee supply chains.
Thanks, Kelly. Kate?
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Kimberly. Thanks, Greg. For us, as Cacao Latitudes, we're working with organizations that I think that Equal Origins and the GEI have helped us sort of provide a way to invest in our extension services and our service providers in doing a better job getting to everyone. We've talked multiple times about access, and the great thing about the GEI is you have more than, it goes beyond just access. So we're starting to ask better questions and go beyond the number of farmers that are women that are participating, and start to understand how we get to doing the work that we're already doing, in some cases directly, in some cases through our organizations, but reaching a greater population within those groups. And as you mentioned, Kimberly, having that kind of outcome and impact. Now, we started working with Equal Origins in 2020, and not only Cacao Latitudes, but Ecom has integrated the GEI into their improving livelihoods plan for the next few years, because as you said, it's not just working with women as a point, it's improving livelihoods across the board when we get this participation and we do this better. So I think for us, it's not just engaging and providing equal access, it's going those steps further that the GEI is giving us. That is why we've adopted it across multiple areas across all of Ecom.
Thank you, Kate. Great. So what we'd like to do now is to talk a little bit more, and Greg, I'm going to turn this over to you, but talk a little bit more about current initiatives and how practically these are happening, what kind of impact you're seeing on the ground, And then we can dig in a little bit more to the Gender Equity Index, the tool, and the Better Together workshop. But I'd like to hear, obviously, Pablo and Michael, all of you have been supporting gender work for some time in your supply chains. You've already touched on some of the ways that you're engaging with Equal Origins. So I know Greg has a few questions to move us into a bit more of an exploration of what's happening in your organizations and where what your vision is for moving forward.
Thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, I think as an industry, we have some very ambitious sustainability goals, from net zero to regenerative ag, to good agricultural practices, to increasing yields and quality, economic sustainability. And it's really becoming clear to the industry that these goals are just not going to be achieved without women being a critical part of that effort. So in that vein, the Gender Equity Index has really been designed to reach two key spots on the value chain. The two spots that really have the most frequent and direct contact with farmers, and that's a Gender Equity Index for extension and advisory service providers like HRNS and his Coffee and Climate project, as well as the other capacity building he's doing. And we have a Gender Equity Index also designed specifically for producer organizations. And Michael will be talking specifically about their experience using the tool, what insights using this diagnostic tool did for them, how it assisted them on their gender equity journey. So with that preface, I'd like to start, Pablo, with you. You and your team in Guatemala and Honduras have been now working with us for the last 7 weeks on the Better Together workshop. And the process, you've been great. Pablo has actually been helping to improve our workshop along the way. But I'd like maybe you to take a little bit of time and talk about some of the insights or some of the unexpected things that have happened as your team has gone through taking the Gender Equity Index, looking at their recommendations, and then your team reflecting on their own potential roles. Any comments around your insights into that, or any points that you think would be valuable for the folks here today to hear?
Sí, gracias, Greg. Yo creo que es importante resaltar el hecho de que, nuevamente, cuando pensamos en transversalizar un enfoque de género, realmente tenemos que vivirlo a lo largo de diferentes posiciones de la fundación. Y es básicamente cómo involucramos a nuestro personal a diferentes niveles, ¿verdad? Para tener realmente lentes o una visión de género más integral, que pasa por no solo la dirección de la fundación, pasa por que nuestro equipo de monitoreo y evaluación pueda estar involucrado, que nuestro equipo de finanzas pueda involucrarse de una mejor manera. Y esto ha sido parte del trabajo que hemos logrado hacer con Equal Origins. Creo que como fundación es importante destacar, ¿verdad?, el hecho de que básicamente, si bien es cierto, incorporamos en nuestra teoría de cambio, no somos expertos en género, y si uno reconoce sus debilidades, tiene que buscar realmente organizaciones que puedan ayudarlo a mejorar y avanzar. Es de esta manera que hemos empezado esta alianza con Equal Origins. Creo que un tema muy relevante es poder utilizar el índice, porque es una herramienta que nos permite realmente contextualizar qué pasa de zona en zona, ¿no? Cómo pueden variar los resultados, cómo puede entender uno sus principales debilidades para cada uno de los ámbitos, para cada uno de los 5 ámbitos, y poder realmente, tanto de manera interna, establecer su propio plan de trabajo, pero también hacia afuera, cómo podemos brindar un mejor servicio de extensión, ¿sí?, que pasa por temas agrícolas, que pasa por mejorar las capacidades de las cooperativas y de las asociaciones, y de cómo les estamos brindando estos servicios de asesoría pero que sean sensibles al género, ¿verdad? Lo mismo con temas de cambio climático o con juventud, ¿verdad?
Ujú.
Thank you, Pablo, for that. And maybe a follow-up question to that would be, you spoke a little bit about the budgeting and that particular piece. I think what we're seeing is that the overall strategy of the Gender Equity Index is really about how do we design for instance, a good agricultural practices training that includes perhaps gender awareness training for agronomists and frontline staff. So has the Gender Equity Index, has that process given you some additional clarity about how to internally move your own internal capacity building efforts in tandem with delivering services like good agricultural practices or coffee and climate?
Sí, definitivamente, porque básicamente a través de las principales debilidades que hemos encontrado en el índice, estamos construyendo este plan de acción, ¿sí? Que nos permita incorporar esta visión de género de manera interna en la fundación para seguir construyendo capacidades, ¿verdad? Para seguir teniendo una persona que nos acompañe en construir ese liderazgo de transversalización de género. Eso requiere ubicar presupuestos, pero también requiere ubicar presupuestos para poder continuar formando, sensibilizando y dando mejores herramientas a nuestro equipo, ¿verdad? Y por otro lado, en la construcción de nuestras propuestas, ¿verdad? Cómo vamos siendo más incluyentes, ¿verdad? De que desde la construcción de nuestras propuestas realmente ubiquemos recursos para poder crear este empoderamiento de género.
Excellent. Thank you, Pablo. Mikael, I'd like to go to you next. Your experience of the Gender Equity Index has been at the producer organization level. It's brought new awarenesses so I'd like to talk I'd like to hear a little bit from you about how the awareness of gender equity has changed over time within your producer organization as the result of this self-reflection that's been able to take place through the Better Together workshop and utilization of this diagnostic tool called the Gender Equity Index.
Muchas gracias, Greg. La herramienta ha sido muy importante para nosotros como organización porque nos ha permitido identificar debilidades, puntos de mejora dentro de la organización. Para ello hemos participado con todo el equipo técnico, equipo dirigencial y también con el Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera. Y nos ha permitido identificar cuáles son puntos de mejora dentro de nuestro trabajo a nivel de equidad de género, y dentro de ello veíamos que lo principal es seguir fortaleciendo capacidades. Capacidades a nivel de productoras, a nivel también de núcleo familiar en nuestra base social, y también poder ir viendo que hay políticas, hay instrumentos de gestión que se deben implementar para que ese relevo se siga brindando, ¿no? Y que es un punto importante la equidad de género para que todos sientan la igualdad de condiciones, la igualdad de oportunidades. Y ha sido una herramienta muy importante porque nos ha permitido también poder plasmar presupuestos al Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera para poder seguir haciendo el trabajo a nivel de base social. Es una herramienta muy importante porque nos hace también identificar y priorizar qué es lo que deberíamos abordar para el tema de la sostenibilidad. La equidad de género para nosotros es muy importante porque aborda tanto socios hombres, mujeres, y también viendo desde el lado de la producción el relevo generacional, ¿no? E identificar a los jóvenes y también hacer un trabajo diferenciado con ellos. Nuestro Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera integra a las 214 socias mujeres, ellos están en contacto directo con ellas, pero a través de la herramienta nos permite también identificar que debería haber un diagnóstico de necesidades, ¿no? De ellas para poder enfocarse en eso y seguir fortaleciendo. Esa es la experiencia que hemos tenido como organización y hemos visto que es una herramienta muy importante, ¿no? Que ayuda mucho al tema de la cooperativa.
Thank you. One of the things that I'm hearing both from Pablo and Mikael is that these gender equity development plans that they're creating to guide the internal capacity building, what this results in is everybody on the team begins to understand what their specific role is to move gender equity forward. And I think this is one of those internal validation points that if your team internally knows what their role is and knows how they can contribute to this effort, then I think you have a good gender equity development plan. If your organization is sort of siloed, where maybe there's one gender expert that is sort of responsible for ensuring gender equity of an entire issue, this is not going to result in the same kind of efficiency, the same kind of progress that's going to happen when everybody knows their role. So that's what the gender equity development plan results in, is a clearer definition of what are the team's roles and how they can achieve those goals. I'd like to talk now with Kate and Kelly a little bit, because one of the impressions that we have in the industry, and one of the impressions that we have on the development side of the fence, is that brands and funders are very interested in directly investing in women and reaching women specifically. And what we're moving towards here is we're expanding that. Yes, that's of course a vital, absolute priority, the direct contact and direct impact on women. But we're also now looking at the market is also very interested in building your capacity, building the capacity of service providers. They realize that gender equity is a relatively new concept. It's complicated. People have varying degrees of understanding of what it means to them. And so they're very willing to come alongside and ensure that these projects also, that a portion of these projects contribute to the capacity building of the organizations themselves. So Kate, maybe you would like to start with that and just talk about how that has maybe shifted for you over time, or give us a sense from your side of the fence about your willingness to make these kinds of investments.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. I think the concept of supporting women at origin and finding ways to has been through individual projects or complementary projects in the past that add an element of gender to some sort of project implementation. And for us, it's sort of allowing, I guess, an improved understanding of extension service providing. So how often do we get a training on how to deliver, adult education better, or as, like we were talking about earlier, this is behavior change. We're talking about theories of change within these cooperatives and organizations. So it's important for us not just to get that information out, but to improve the result. And if we can use something like the GEI to improve on good agricultural practice training, in addition to providing some sort of women's leadership training as part of that overall service, you can see how that's more integrated into kind of the overall organization plan, and then also for extension providers, giving them an understanding of a holistic view. And so I think for us as ECOM, it's part of a more holistic view. I
really appreciate that. I mean, what we're really talking about in many ways is a a qualitative evaluation of the services that we're providing, and the qualitative analysis from the Gender Equity Index is with the gender lens. It's a qualitative analysis of our programs through a gender lens. So that's super interesting.
Greg, yeah, you mentioned, I mean, we talked about this before, but part of it is going from kind of that gender neutral to gender responsive. And that's something that I really feel like that's what you get with the GEI. And we're being more responsive to each segment of our of those services and investing in our service providers to make that shift. So I think those sometimes feel very nuanced and very small, but they can be big and really kind of sweeping when you put the effort in, I think.
Absolutely, I appreciate that perspective. And Kelly, again, you've been Allegro has had a long history of making gender equity investments. You've made a lot of investments directly in cooperatives, getting on their plan of action. Allegro has funded many siloed projects that benefit specifically women and across a variety of things. And this is an addition. The Gender Equity Index is sort of an addition to what's a pretty sophisticated gender equity portfolio. So maybe you could take a little bit of time here and describe why, as a brand, spending some time here sort of sharpening the saw, as you will, helping our extension and advisory service providers to gain the skills and strategies they need. Why is that compelling to you, and why does that actually help you build trust when an EAS provider, for instance, says, you know, we've got some growth to do in this area, and we'd like your help growing? Just describe that relationship building, how that's been going for you, and what that's been like.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I would love to describe it. And I think what I really enjoyed hearing from all the panelists, and including Michael at Chirinos, we've really appreciated what the Gender Equity Index has done for our supply chains. And it's not only us as roasters, but also with importers, with other organizations, not only farmers that we buy from, the co-ops that we buy from, but also other organizations that are really becoming aware that this is such an important initiative. And the Gender Equity Index allows us for people just take a pulse on where they are in gender equity awareness, how they can create a plan or even start thinking and reflecting about it, and how they can create a plan within their organization to advance gender equity. For us as Allegro, and thanks again for those kind words, Greg, that was really nice. For Allegro, we really we want to meet people where they're at in this journey, and the Gender Equity Index helps identify that. We want to support whatever work that they want to do, or support whatever work that they have in their plan already, and really see how they can include gender equity, a gender equity lens, as you say, through other sustainability projects that they may have going on. I was lucky enough to participate in a couple of the webinars that we've done in the past with Equal Origins and with cooperative organizations. And I think the biggest thing that I took away from the last one that we did with our partners in Peru was really the opportunity to give women a voice in how decisions are made. So it doesn't matter if you're building a water tank or you're putting a garden to create diversity for income, but really implementing the gender equity lens into those projects. And that includes creating times where women can attend the trainings, providing transportation or childcare. It's those little things, as Kate mentioned earlier, that it's very small, subtle nuances that actually make a difference. And we've really seen an impact within our supply chains, and it's been a great journey.
Thank you for that. And Bemlak, I'd like to have you close out this loop with, you've been traveling now with our Ethiopian group and our project with the GIZ. You're sort of watching the transformation happen. I'd like you just to reflect sort of as from an outside perspective, looking in on organizations at multiple levels, from the plantation level to GIZ's extension and advisory team. What are you seeing as sort of the awareness building or the value of this process for those teams?
I've had a chance to see that, one, the context, even if it's in a similar origin country, it's different for all three organizations, and the work that they need to do differs based on that, although they have the same values and interests to further gender equity. And the other thing is there was, I believe, a misconception that including gender in sustainability development plans needs to be this very huge thing that needs to happen, needs a whole set of I don't know, placement within the sustainability development plan, but it's actually something they can incorporate with the things that they're already doing. And it's something that really just needs a few steps ahead every time. And I think the misconception that it's a very daunting task has been able to change with the different organizations.
Thank you for making that point. One of the things that we have seen is that the industry is farther along in terms of developing programming specifically designed to benefit women. So village savings and loan accounts, women's leadership programs, alternate entrepreneurial support, financing and microfinancing for women. These are these individual siloed projects which directly benefit women, and it's fantastic. And what we see is that the industry is actually developing along those lines quite well. But the area that we saw as an organization at Equal Origins, the area that we saw that was the weakest was this: how do we integrate gender equity into our GAP training, into our agroforestry training? And yeah, this slide here really speaks to that specifically. And so both of these things, the direct benefit programmatic, that is one very important part of a gender equity portfolio, as Kelly from Allegro mentioned. But also, how do we integrate gender into all of the other program components that we're doing? This is the area where we saw that the industry was needing additional support and awareness on, and the research that we did in 2020 in partnership with Yale really did confirm the state of extension and service provision is that by and large it was gender neutral, meaning people thought, well, good agricultural practices training is good agricultural practices training. And we're not doing anything to keep women out. And of course, we're inviting women to participate. We're just surprised why they're not showing up. And so what we begin to see as we pick that apart is that it's a multifaceted issue in order to see those numbers improve. Several things have to take place in terms of capacity building of the team, representation of men and women on the team, but very important, knowing who the women are and really having a project level gender analysis where you're engaging the community that you're going to be working with and really understanding what their needs are, what their desires are. And from that point of view, the good agricultural practices training or the agroforestry project can begin to be modified to address the needs, desires, and concerns of both the men and women on the farm.
And I think this starts to address some of the questions in the Q&A. We have one question from Medium from Honduras asking about, how do we cause shifts in farmer organizations, for example, where so many of the decisions relating to budget are actually mostly in the hands of the male leadership, the leadership that is male. And so I think, I'd like to ask Mikhail to respond specifically to that. But if we look at the involvement of the market actors like Kelly and having the gender equity development plan in place, recognizing that through the report, there are actually recommendations about leadership. And so the gender equity development plan of the farmer organization should then include some activities to start to move to greater representation of women in leadership positions. And a company like Kelly or Cacao Latitudes could then see that as an opportunity to invest, or development cooperation as well, in terms of designing projects to help farmer organizations advance, can use the Gender Equity Index and the development plan to guide their investment. So maybe Mikhail, if you have a response to Miriam's question as well. Which is
Michael Montevallo.
I think you're waiting for the translation.
Sí, muchas gracias. Gracias, Kimberly. Nosotros como organización contamos con el Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera, pero también tenemos hoy en día socias mujeres presentes en los consejos directivos, tanto de administración, vigilancia y comités especializados. Y dentro de nuestro plan operativo anual, el Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera cuenta con un presupuesto. Sabemos a veces que hay mayoría de socios hombres, pero siempre se hace un trabajo de concientización, ¿no? Y hablando también de las actividades en específico que se van a desarrollar sobre el tema de equidad de género, y en especial orientándose con el apoyo del Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera. Ha ido mejorándose estos últimos años las iniciativas, identificando oportunidades de mejora. Sabemos que a veces es un poco complicado que quieran destinar un presupuesto, pero acá en Chirinos sí, ya lo tienen ya dentro de su plan operativo considerado destinar un presupuesto. Y si hay actividades en específico que se tienen que desarrollar, también lo enmarcamos dentro de nuestro plan operativo anual. Hemos visto que es necesario poder establecerlo dentro de nuestros estatutos, que hemos elaborado hace un mes. Ya hemos actualizado nuestros estatutos, donde hemos puesto que al menos dentro de los cargos directivos deberían haber un 20% de representación de socias mujeres. Y ahora lo que nos toca es empoderarlas a ellas, ¿no? Seguir fortaleciendo sus capacidades para que acepten el reto también de ser parte de los consejos directivos, y que ellas también sean las líderes que apoyen a la gestión, ¿no? Entonces ese trabajo lo venimos haciendo con aliados, ya sean con ONGs, también en este lado con aliados comerciales como Alegro, que nos da la oportunidad de articular comercialmente el tema de café femenino, que se destina un presupuesto de la prima del diferencial hacia el Comité de la Mujer Cafetalera, para que hagan actividades en específico y sigan fortaleciendo las capacidades de nuestras socias mujeres. Entonces, esto nos ha permitido como organización también crecer en membresía femenina. Hoy en día ya tenemos más de 200 socias mujeres, y vemos que hay muchas más que se están empoderando y que están queriendo también ser parte de la organización, ¿no? Entonces, eso es muy, muy importante para nosotros, y consideramos que también los socios hombres están tomando la importancia de vida hacia las socias mujeres y teniendo igualdad de oportunidades y condiciones. Sé que es un trabajo que tenemos que ir fortaleciéndolo día a día, pero se está realizando acá en Chirinos, ¿no? Esa es nuestra experiencia.
Thank you, Michael. I think we're clear that this is a journey. It is not something you flip a switch to become gender equitable from one day to the next. It does require often external support and advocacy and encouragement for the farmer organizations to prioritize gender equity. And the Gender Equity Index and the approach with the Gender Equity Development Plan can certainly help to guide that. I want to just turn quickly. We do have a couple of other questions that I think we can still answer. But to just highlight the series of the Better Together workshop that we have, we're implementing with the Neumann Foundation. You've heard Pablo talk about it and also Bemlak talk about it with the Ethiopia program. We have others coming online to do more work in East Africa and also Central and South America. Again, this is a program that both farmer organizations can participate in, as well as service providers. There's a question about data collection and the changes that we've observed since using the Gender Equity Index. And what I want to highlight here is that the Gender Equity Index is a tool to strengthen the capacity of farmer organizations and organizations like the Neumann Foundation and other service providers on the ground. So given that the Gender Equity Index is still relatively new, the change to be monitored and to be captured is in how those organizations change their service provision over time. So it's the improvements in the capacity of the organizations themselves to deliver services that reach and benefit women equally to men, and over time serve to empower the women and transform the local contexts. So at this moment, we do not have gender indicators per se where we're measuring the impact. We will get to that, but what we realized is that we have to walk before we can run in the sector. And we will be inviting companies and organizations that are participating in the programs to work with us to design a fit for purpose set of indicators that we can then use to measure impact. So thanks for those questions. We are getting close to time here, and what I would like to highlight as we start to close out is that every single one of us on this call and in all of our organizations, we have a role to play. I think that's the exciting thing, is that people are starting to realize that this is not just about what the gender experts do, what the women's committee or the gender committees do, but that every single person, from the bookkeeper, from the extension agents, from the management, everyone has something that they can do in terms of how they perform their roles. So we invite everyone to check out the Gender Equity Index. I'll share a link in the next slide. We will have a session in a couple of weeks for farmer organizations in Spanish that want to participate and learn more about the GEI and our tools. That includes the 60 farmer organizations that we've already worked with. We're inviting companies or those farmer organizations to re-engage. Development partners, there is a lot of, there are many proposals out for bid, so we would love to be a part of your bids and your project designs. We invite you to learn more about the Better Together workshop. We have a capabilities statement which we can share with you that can help you see ideas for how we could partner together. And then of course, brands and roasters, just like Kelly and Kate have been highlighting, we welcome you to invest in the work of these farmer organizations and your origin partners, as well as in Equal Origins. There are many opportunities to support this work. So just a close here. If you want to grab the link below or screenshot here of the QR code, reach out to Greg or myself, and we'd be happy to set up a call. We'll have another webinar next quarter, so stay tuned for that. Sign up for our email list if you haven't already. And we really want to acknowledge our investor partners that have helped to make the GEI possible. And of course, partners like Neumann Foundation and GIZ and others who are taking up the work. We're very excited to be able to soon share the results of that work in more detail with you in subsequent online opportunities. So thank you all so much for joining. We welcome your collaboration. We really do see that it's possible to achieve gender, the SDG 5 in the coffee and cocoa sectors and beyond. And we invite all of you to join us on a journey to make that possible. We'll be sending out an email to follow up and keep in touch with you all. So thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists for their precious time and the valuable input that they shared. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.